everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture, and I am coming to you with the Easter eggs from the Devil's Chord. Now, we've already put a video out with all the Easter eggs that we found in Space Babies, and now I do finally have the Easter eggs for you for the Devil's Chord, so let's get straight into them. Number 23. So, the very opening of this episode takes place in 1925. Now, that is the same year that the Giggle opened, and that is also the year that we first met Neil Patrick Harris's toy maker. So clearly, 1925 is kind of some sort of nexus point for all of these godlike beings. And Russell T Davies himself, in some of the behind-the-scenes material, suggested that 1925 is when the gods were kind of set loose into this universe. So I wouldn't be surprised if we revisit 1925 again in some future episodes. Now, it does make sense though, doesn't it, that the toy maker started in 1925 and therefore so did Maestro. I wonder how many other gods we're going to meet and if they're all going to begin in 1925. Number 22. So in that cold open, we meet Timothy Drake, who is the piano teacher for Harbinger, or Henry Arbinger. This character is played by Jerry Lim. Now, he's an accomplished musician in his own right, but he's actually connected to Doctor Who. So beyond being a self-proclaimed lifelong fan of Doctor Who, his dad, Roger Lim, was actually a composer who worked on Doctor Who back in the 1980s. And he was actually responsible for some of the music that was heard in Four to Doomsday, Black Orchid, and the Caves of Androzani, amongst other stories as well. So it's really nice to see that kind of familial connection still continuing in the legacy of Doctor Who, even if he didn't last very long. Number 21. So while we're on the topic of Timothy Drake, when he plays the Devil's Chord, the piano slams shut. Whether this was intentional or not from Russell T Davies, I don't know, but there were 4 knocks from within the piano. There were other moments where there were more than 4 knocks, but there was a distinct moment where there were 4 knocks. David Tennant, wherever you are in the world, I think you should run. So in case you don't know, he will knock 4 times was kind of like this prophecy that was told to the 10th Doctor that suggested that his life was coming to an end, and when he knocks 4 times, he would then die. Those 4 knocks here definitely made my mind go, uh-oh. Now, obviously, given the significance of those 4 knocks for Russell T Davies's era as showrunner the first time round, surely this was intentional. I mean, maybe it wasn't, maybe there was no direction, but it also isn't impossible to imagine that the script actually said Maestro knocks 4 times. I guess we'll never know. Or maybe we will when we eventually get to see the script pages. Number 20. So Henry passes Mr. Timothy Drake his book that has the list of students he is going to be teaching that day. And obviously we see Henry Arbinger change to Harbinger, but there's some other names in that book. Now, at least 2 of those names belong to actual crew members on the set of Doctor Who. So Charlie Shelley is credited as Petty Cash Buyer, and Stephen Fielding is credited as Graphic Designer. Now, the other 2 names, Robert Owens and David Hangley, we couldn't find those in the credits, but that doesn't mean that they weren't also members of the crew. They may have just been uncredited members of the crew, or people that crew members knew, friends or family members that they thought it'd be fun to just add their names in. Number 19. So a little bit later in the episode, we have the Doctor and Ruby get all dressed up in their 60s gear, and they step out of the TARDIS and they walk across the famous Abbey Road crossing. Now, most people will recognise this crossing from the Beatles album cover for Abbey Road from 1969, but it's actually not the first time that it has appeared within the Whoniverse as well. So while they were promoting Series 9 back in 2015, yeah, that's right folks, Series 9 was almost a decade ago. When they were doing the promotional things for that series, Peter Capaldi and Jenna Coleman did their own little version of the Abbey Road cover, and they also had some Daleks with them as well, in place of the other 2 Beatles. Also, there's a Big Finish audio called 1963 Fanfare for the Common Men, and the cover for that is also an homage to the Abbey Road cover, and this time it features the 5th Doctor. Number 18. So we go inside Abbey Road Studios, and behind the Doctor on the wall there are some posters, and one of those is for John Smith and the Common Men. Now, John Smith and the Common Men was a band referenced all the way back in the very first episode of Doctor Who ever aired in 1963, An Unearthly Child, and was mentioned by the Doctor's granddaughter, Susan.
It's John Smith and the Common Men. They've gone from 19 to 2.
Now, we have quite a few Susan connections. We've mentioned one in Space Babies, I've got a few more to come later on. Definitely something going on with Susan here, I would say. Number 17. Speaking of Susan, a different Susan here, or is it? We have another Susan Twist cameo, this time as a tea lady. Now obviously we've had multiple cameos or multiple appearances from Susan Twist at this point. We've had Mrs. Merridew, we've had the woman in the pub, and we had Gina Scalzi in Space Babies as well. And then here we have the tea lady. But what's interesting about this particular appearance is one of the lines that she says. When the doctor says that the price of the cup of tea is daylight robbery, she says, "Margaret Lockwood in The Wicked Lady, that's me," or something to that effect. Now, The Wicked Lady is a 1945 film that starred Margaret Lockwood, and she played a character called Barbara Worth. And in that film, she impersonates a highway robber, and then later on comes face to face with the person she's impersonating, and they kind of form this very untrusting relationship. But there's lots of themes of impersonation within this film, so it does make us wonder if there is relevance to that with regards to Susan Twist's character. Now obviously she's playing all these different characters, so there's maybe an element of impersonation there. But is this perhaps a suggestion this character is hiding who they truly are? Or are they pretending to be someone and then are they going to come face to face with the person they're pretending to be? It was just a very interesting choice of reference to make here. I mean, it could literally have just been a time-appropriate reference to make for the 60s setting, and it literally was just a comment on the price of the cup of tea. But it also might not be. Number 16. So the Doctor and Ruby later on, they head on up to the roof, and the Doctor tells Ruby that he lives nearby in Shoreditch in a junkyard on Totters Lane. Or rather, he currently lives there. Basically, it's a bit confusing because he's currently stood here, but he's also over there. Timelines wibbly wobbly, nah. So as the 15th Doctor explains, William Hartnell's first Doctor landed the TARDIS in a junkyard on Totters Lane in 1963, and that was in the very first episode of Doctor Who, An Unearthly Child, as I previously mentioned. So obviously this is where Doctor Who began. It's where the first Doctor met his first companions, and they left to go on these wild adventures. It wasn't a very subtle reference, obviously he blatantly said it out loud, but it was a reference nonetheless.
I live over there.
You do what?
I live over there.
Number 15. So within this little conversation, we also have the mention of Susan. So another Susan connection here. And he says that he doesn't know what happened to her. And then he also goes on to say that all the Time Lords were murdered. But it's actually a little bit unclear as to which event where Time Lords were suffering he's referring to. So he does say there was a genocide across time and space. So potentially that's a reference to the Time War, which obviously was waged across the entire universe. Now obviously Gallifrey was saved by the Doctor later on, and that all became a complicated situation, but who knows, she might have been killed in battle. The timelines of things do get a little bit confusing. He could also be referring to Flux, which did destroy a good portion of the universe, or it could be a reference to the Master's destruction of Gallifrey in Series 12, and then the use of the Death Particle, which wiped out all organic life on Gallifrey. So there's a few options there as to which moment the Doctor's referring to in terms of the genocide of the Time Lords. But either way, the Doctor seems to think that Susan might be dead, which is a very good... It's not very good. Let me rephrase that. It's perfectly primed then for us to get a surprise return of Susan later on, especially if the Doctor thinks she's dead. It will be really wonderful to see that reunion between them if he has no idea that it is even possible. Number 14. So while they're on the roof, the Doctor asks Ruby to play a song on the piano to bring music back into the world, to bring the joy of music back into the world. And the music that Ruby starts to play, she says, is a song she wrote for her friend Trudy after a girl broke her heart. Now we have met Trudy in the church on Ruby Road. She was the singer in Ruby's band who were playing in the pub on the 22nd of December 2023. Now there has been a little bit of speculation that the girl who broke Trudy's heart might actually have been Ruby, especially when you consider the emotion that's in this piece of music. It definitely feels like something that's come from the heart. Also, just a bonus little tidbit here, the music that Ruby is actually playing is actually Ruby's theme. It's called The Life of Ruby Sunday, it's composed by Murray Gold, and non-diegetically that is Ruby's theme tune, so it gets very meta. Number 13, we have a cameo from a classic Doctor Who crew member. So the old woman who hears Ruby playing on the piano and then is subsequently killed by Maestro after she starts playing music on her own piano, that is June Hudson. And June Hudson was a costume designer who worked during the Tom Baker era during the 1970s and the early 1980s. And this isn't actually the first time that June Hudson has been involved in New Who. So she actually auditioned for the role of Mrs. Pitt in Mummy on the Orient Express, but scheduling conflicts meant that she actually couldn't play that part. But she did have a minor role in the very short-lived spin-off Class, but this is her first on-screen appearance in Doctor Who. Number 12, so when Maestro emerges from within that piano, we hear a very familiar laugh, and that is the giggle. So the giggle was the sound that was secretly embedded in all screens around the world by the toy maker, and it turned humanity mad when it was unleashed in the modern day, and it was the laugh of the toy maker. And as a child of the toy maker, it's not necessarily that surprising that Maestro has this in common with their dad. Number 11. So the Doctor then mentions a bit later on that Maestro must be part of the Pantheon. The Pantheon of Discord was a group of sinister godlike beings that were mentioned in the Sarah Jane Adventures. Now the Trickster, who was a villain that was very prominent in the Sarah Jane Adventures, who was manipulating lots of timelines, he is a member of the Pantheon. Now assuming that Maestro and the Toymaker are also members of the Pantheon, it does make you wonder if maybe we're going to see the Trickster in Doctor Who. This is something that a lot of Sarah Jane Adventure fans have been hoping for, because the Trickster is a really great villain, and to see him appear in the main show would really be something special. Number 10. So Ruby thinks that the Earth can't be destroyed in 1963 because A, she's still alive, and B, she knows that music still exists in her time. So to prove that time can be rewritten, the Doctor takes her to the present, to June 2024, and shows her that the world has been completely destroyed. This is a reference to a very similar moment in the 4th Doctor serial, Pyramids of Mars, where Sarah Jane Smith asked the Doctor to leave the year 1911 and return to 1980. But the Doctor says that he can't because the powerful villain Sutekh could destroy the world. And then Sarah Jane replies that Sutekh didn't destroy the world in 1911 because, well, she's from the future and all is well in the future. And in response, the Doctor takes her to 1980 and the Earth is a wasteland. Now, Russell T Davies did say that they've been trying to do a sequence like this in New Who since 2005, and only now were they able to actually pull it off. I mean, it did look pretty cool. Number 9. So after we've had the Earth destroyed in the future part, we have Maestro appear, and in this conversation, Maestro calls the Doctor timey-wimey. Now obviously we are all familiar that timey-wimey is a phrase that was said quite often by the 10th Doctor. It was first said in the episode Blink when he said things were wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
More like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
But it's quite meta here because this is again something that Maestro seems to know, and you don't understand quite how Maestro knows, and it's all very confusing. Number 8, and then right after we hear timey-wimey, Maestro plays a few notes of the Doctor Who theme tune on the piano, and that is then followed by something that you might not have realised was actually a distorted version of the theme tune.
Oh, honey, I don't think so.
So again, it gets very, very meta. This sends the TARDIS into a little frenzy, the TARDIS goes crazy and all bad things happen. But again, that's twice in this episode that Maestro has played the Doctor Who theme tune. You know, you're very confused as to what's going on. Are you in the reality of Doctor Who? Are we in our reality? What is going on? There's so many fourth wall breaks, and moments like this are like, what? Number 7. So when we go back to 1963, the Doctor and Ruby step out of the TARDIS and the Doctor says Hadiama, which is Turkish for come on. And this is very reminiscent of the 10th Doctor saying Allons-y, which is French for let's go. And it's just nice to pick up this theme of the Doctor having this phrase in a different language that kind of just, let's do it, come on, let's go. And I thought that was very, very nice to see.
Hadiama!
Number 6. So as we mentioned, Maestro is the child of the toy maker. Now, many of you probably noticed this, but Maestro's final outfit, the third outfit Maestro wears in this episode, bears a very striking resemblance to the outfit worn by the toy maker in the Giggle, or one of the outfits worn by the toy maker in the Giggle. And this was intentionally designed that way. It also looks quite similar to one of the outfits worn by one of the toy maker's playthings in the original first Doctor serial, The Celestial Toy Maker. So again, there was a nice little nod to the toy maker of now and the toy maker of the 60s in the design of this costume. Number 5. So after defeating Maestro, the Doctor and Ruby, they go back onto the roof so that they can hear all the music returned to the world. And the camera pans around and we see a billboard for Chris Waits and the Carolers. So you remember earlier when we mentioned John Smith and the Common Men? Well, as explained by companion Ian Chesterton back in that very first episode in 1963, John Smith is actually the stage name of a musician called Aubrey Waits, who started his career in the group Chris Waits and the Carolers. Could mean nothing but Chris Waits and the Carolers. So the one who waits. And what song is deep inside Ruby's soul? Carol of the Bells. Is there a connection to Ruby here somehow? Is there a connection to Ruby that's been formed from something all the way back in the very first episode of Doctor Who ever? I wouldn't be surprised. Number 4. So during the final dance number, we can see a few dancers doing a very specific twist move. So if this rings a bell, it might be because it was famously performed by Uma Thurman in Quentin Tarantino's iconic movie Pulp Fiction, during the scene where she and John Travolta take part in the dance contest. Now, according to Tarantino, he got the idea for Thurman to do a twist like this from the Disney animation classic The Aristocats, specifically from some of the moves that are pulled by Duchess during the number Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. And in the behind the scenes material for this episode, the choreographer for this dance number actually mentions all sorts of reference points for his choreography, and one of those is the Blues Brothers and the other is John Travolta. So I don't doubt for a second that Pulp Fiction was in the back of his mind when he was creating this dance sequence. Number 3, we have more cameos in this episode, and this time it is Doctor Who composer Murray Gold, and he can be briefly spotted sat at the piano during this last musical number. Now obviously Murray Gold is the current composer for Doctor Who, but he was also the composer between 2005 and 2017, and it's really great to see him back, and it's also really great to see him actually on screen for a change. Number 2, we have even more cameos, because there are 2 people that Ruby and the Doctor stop to have a little dance break with, and that is Shirley Ballas and Johannes Radebe. And they are famous dancers who can be seen on Strictly Come Dancing. Now obviously if you're going to have a dance number in Doctor Who, it makes perfect sense for Russell to be like, you know who I'm going to call? I'm going to call those folks over on Strictly Come Dancing. And we know that Strictly and Doctor Who have often shared the kind of evening slots on the BBC on Saturday evenings, so that was quite nice to just see that little crossover there. And number 1, at the very end of the episode, we have Ruby and the Doctor dancing on the Abbey Road zebra crossing like it's a piano, and this was almost definitely inspired by a very similar scene in the Tom Hanks film Big, where Tom Hanks's character dances on this huge piano in a toy shop, and in both cases the keys actually light up as they jump on them. So it's a very, very good scene in Big. It's a very underrated film actually, so if you haven't seen Big, I would definitely suggest you go and watch it. And that's all the Easter eggs that we managed to spot in this episode. If you spotted one that we've missed, then do let us know in the comments down below. And stick around to make sure that you've tapped the notification bell, because we'll have content just like this coming out for every new episode of Season 1. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of River Song herself, goodbye, sweeties.